politics, albeit it's in the afternoon, it's the same format. I'd also like to welcome Real Times Media National News Director Mark Hayes, who will join us throughout our discussion with General Motors CEO Mary Barra. Mary, welcome.
So great to be here. Thanks so much.
I mean, it's fantastic. The day is beautiful, the weather's nice, and we're coming out of some challenging times. So Absolutely. I'm glad we were able to sit down in person,
yes,
6 feet apart,
right,
albeit still with our mask off. You know, you run a multinational, publicly traded company with 50,000 employees, and you know, a lot of people see your public facade. And so a lot of times when we have people very senior who the public and our viewers don't get that much time to interact with, we like to ask a couple personal questions at the outset to get us started.
Sure.
So if you don't mind, your favorite band or performance, music group, etc.
Oh, Bon Jovi.
All right.
Yeah.
Have you seen them live in concert?
I have, when they were in Detroit a few years back, and it was great.
They put on a good show?
They did.
I would have to go probably with the Jacksons, back when all the Jacksons could be together.
Yeah, that would be special.
Outside of GM, obviously, what corporate brand do you admire most and why?
Well, I sit on the board, but that's not why. It's probably because I admire them so much, but it's Disney. Mm-hmm. And it's because they're so focused on the customer.
Right.
And so when I had the opportunity to join the board, I thought it was wonderful because I could learn what that Disney magic is all about. That's,
right,
you know, just delighting people.
And so do you take a lot of what you learn from being involved with that corporation and try to drive it down through your organization?
Absolutely, absolutely. At General Motors, we talk about putting the customer at the center of everything we do. And, you know, my predecessor said it, and he was so true. He said, we don't win until the customer tells us we win.
Right.
And so we really have worked hard to make sure we're thinking about the customer with every decision we make.
And the last one, ice cream, favorite flavor?
Oh, chocolate.
Yeah, that's mine too. Good call. Good call. You know, when I think of ice cream, I think about, you know, my kids and my family, and you know, I have the pleasure of knowing one of your children. And you know, I can remember one time over lunch we had a discussion about having very public parents, and you know, mine was on a much smaller scale. You're globally known, and we talked about the pros and cons of being the children of public people, and we particularly talked about how it feels when people go after your parents. Unwarranted, untrue statements. And you went through a period where you had the leader of the free world who was not necessarily a big fan of yours. You know, how do you navigate that from literally being one of the most powerful corporate people in the world and one of the most powerful women in the world, but you got to be mom too? How do you balance that?
Well, I think when you're in one of those situations, to me, I'm going to live my values. I'm going to live the values of the company that I've given 40 years to and care deeply about, and just try to do the right thing. And, you know, when something's happening, every now and then I might, you know, talk to my kids and say, hey, you know, this has been said, or, you know, you might hear this, mm-hmm, and, you know, I just want you to know, here's the context, or here's what I'm doing about it. And then they're usually like, okay, got it, thanks, you know. But I know they also, they try to be low key with me because I think they want to make sure I'm not going to get more upset if they're upset.
Right.
But I know they're very protective as well.
Yeah, it's tough. It's a good balance, but it's also good real life experience for your kids.
Absolutely. It's the way the world is.
So we sit here in an historic black newspaper's headquarters in Paradise Valley, an historic black neighborhood in Detroit. And General Motors has had a decades-long commitment to Detroit. What's that commitment from you and the corporation today? What does that look like?
Well, this is our home. This is our hometown, and I'm so proud that Detroit is where our home is, because when I think about what it means to be from Detroit, or, you know, work in Detroit, I mean, we have grit here. We get through things. We get things done. We know how to work hard. And so I'm very proud. And, you know, as we have these different conversations about it's the East Coast to the West Coast, I remind people that this is not a flyover city or a flyover state.
That's fantastic. And so for the future of Detroit, as you look globally, as where you will house production facilities, different outposts and offices, and where you'll make strategic investments, what does a city like Detroit have to do to be globally competitive in your eyes?
Well, I think a lot of what the city is doing already, I mean, it's where our global headquarters is and will always be. And, I look at the investment that we just made in Detroit, or making in Detroit-Hamtramck. It'll be the
Huge.
first.
Thank you.
Well, the first plant, and very personal to me because it was a plant that I had the opportunity to be plant manager earlier in my career. So I was just there last week, and we're talking to some of the people that were there when I was there, and
Right.
They couldn't be more proud about what we're doing there. But I think what I see happening in Detroit is there's this partnership between business and the local government to solve challenges. General Motors, we have a huge commitment to education in the city. Because to me, education is the great equalizer. It gives everybody a chance. And so I think the productive work that we're doing together is what's going to make sure that Detroit has a very bright future.
Mary, last spring, late spring or early summer, you stood with the mayor and Reverend Anthony and 8 other of your peers and made some very strong commitments. And separate and aside from those commitments, you stood yourself alone and early, and on behalf of your company, made some very strong commitments as it relates to social inequities, economic inequities, all rooted in large part from George Floyd. I mean, when you talk about your personal feelings, when you saw, I mean, we all have seen on the news, and we know that interactions with the police have not fared well for a lot of black folk for a number of years. It's not new. But to see for several minutes, really, a murder being conducted on television in front of everybody's eyes, what did that mean to you personally? How did you feel?
Well, the sad thing was with George Floyd, it was not the first.
Right.
There had been other issues, and so I think because you could watch it and see and look and go, this can't be happening. This can't be happening here. That I really felt, I was incredibly sad, because not only sad for George Floyd and his family, but I started to think, what's going to happen a week from now?
Right.
People will just go on with their lives, and that's where we kind of came to say, we've got to stop talking about why this happens and start to do something. And that's what really was the statement that, I made representing all of General Motors, and had tremendous support, not only from the leadership team, but our employees, to really say, we've got to change something, because this is not okay.
So that kind of groundswell seemingly of support that you mentioned is interesting. And that was a question I had in mind, because you have a fiduciary responsibility to a lot of folks, employees, suppliers, the markets. Did you take into consideration at all any sort of consumer pushback or discontent from some segment of your consumer base that maybe were not thinking along the same lines you were? Not
really, because it became a question. One of the things I talk about at General Motors is we're going to do the right thing even when it's hard. And not that I'm saying this was hard, because to me this was the right thing to do. But we talk about at General Motors, and we have for years, from before I was in the CEO role, about the need for inclusion, and that's going to lead to better business. So when I think about it from a shareholder, from a supplier, from a customer, from an employee, from a union community, it's the right thing to do.
And so talk about, my partner Mike Carr is famous for saying you can't boil the ocean. And a lot of people, when you make certain pronouncements, they want action next week. They want tangible evidence next week. But with a large institution the size of yours, you can't make true, lasting institutional change that will last far beyond your exit at some point. You can't do that overnight. So talk about what you're doing inside of General Motors, and are you happy with the pace thus far?
I don't think you can ever be happy with the pace. We are on a journey because we want to become the most inclusive company in the world, but I'm always quick to say, that's not a title I want to hold. I want General Motors to hold alone. I want every company to achieve that, because then and every institution, because then that starts to be the world I think we all want to live in. And through forming the Inclusion Advisory Board, thank you for giving us your time.
I've really enjoyed it. It's been great.
Well, and the conversations that we have had, the fund that we started, and the donations we're making to drive change. But I think To me, what I'm most proud of, but where I know we still have a long way to go, and we just had a town hall today. Telva Magruder, who's our Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer, and I hosted, and we had at one point, over 2,000 people participating in this town hall virtually, is getting everybody to think. And we talk about, when I get pushback, because I do, even internally, I say, how can you not want to have an environment where everybody can come to work and be their best self, be valued for what they do, be their true self, and bring that to work? How can you not want that? And then, the other, and this I learned from a lot of listening discussions that I've been a part of, when somebody said, at the end of the day, it's how you make other people feel and how they make you feel is how we're going to create this culture of inclusion and belonging. And I think we're on the journey. Of course, we have more to do.
You mentioned the board, and I'm always cautious because people ask me about it because they know I'm on it. And I try to give broad strokes about, what we're talking about and what we're doing, because a lot of it is proprietary. But what I've been very impressed about, and what I do tell people all the time, is like, you a marker on every call. Like, you're in every meeting and you're participating. And a lot of times senior leaders will create some sort of panel or council and they'll delegate. But you've not delegated. You are in every meeting, you participate in the formation of the agenda, and I just think that means a lot in terms of setting the tone at the top and setting an example at the top.
Well, again, it was something that we committed to do, and I feel very strongly that people have to see that it's very important to myself, to Mark, to the senior leadership team, but I'll also tell you it's very important to our board of directors. I mean, we report out regularly. In fact, we have, in our upcoming board meeting, we'll have a whole diversity, inclusion, and equity update. And we're being held accountable by the board to make sure we're driving real change, sustainable change, and like you say, something that's going to live far beyond any leader that's here today.
Right. Talk about your board, the composition of the board. I mean, a lot of what happens inside of an organization, changes being made, goals being sought, the public does not see. But what the public can see, if they so happen to take a look, is composition of your board, which in some instances you're really pursuing the goals that you're discussing. So talk about the composition of your board. Sure.
Well, our board, we have a wonderful board of incredibly talented people who bring great expertise to General Motors and the overall strategy as well as the governance of the company. But we're about half female, and we have Hispanic and African American representation as well, and then as well as a broad array of experiences. And so, and we also much to bring all issues forward, to to debate issues and to have deep conversations to ensure that we're driving the company forward in a way that's going to be sustainable and is going to drive growth.
As before we got live on air, I mentioned to you that we had an inordinate amount of questions coming from the viewers, and I didn't assume that it was because they wanted to hear from me. So I'm going to ask you one more question, then I'm going to kick it to Mark to take questions from the viewers. I mean, do you have any advice? I mean, some of your corporate peers probably said, well, let's let Mary jump in the water first and test the temperature and see what happens. And they kind of held back, and some haven't acted yet or made any really public pronouncements yet. What advice would you have to some of your corporate peers in leadership?
Well, I think it's, you've always got to act with is what's consistent with what your company believes and the values of the company. But at General Motors, we really do believe in the power of diversity, and that's going to make the business better. And today, when you think about the competition for talent, it's going to create a culture that people are going to want to be a part of. So I would challenge people to look at the most basic parts of their business and really think through why moving forward to become more inclusive, more diverse, providing equity and a true sense of belonging, how that's not going to make the business better. But I have to also tell you, I'm a member of the Business Roundtable where there's about 200 companies, and Doug McMillan, who chairs it, led a special subcommittee going after many different areas. I'm working on the education and workforce, and we had a special subcommittee to deal with racial inequity in addition to the work that we're doing broadly. So I was really proud to see many, many companies engage.
That's fantastic. Mark, I'll kick it over to you. Either questions from you or from some of our viewers.
Absolutely. Dennis, thank you so much. Ms. Barra, what a pleasure to see you. Thank you so much for stopping by Studio 1452 and spending some quality time. I certainly appreciate your frankness and your openness and your willing to come here and engage with us today. Wanted to drill down a little bit further on some of the points you made about education, GM's commitment to education, especially here in the Metro Detroit area, but globally as well. As we move forward in our new green economy, we have to make sure that we have a workforce that is, in fact, ready to keep up with the technology, to be able to apply to a global brand like yours and get positions, especially when we're talking about kids that are coming from underserved areas and areas that aren't receiving top of the line education. It was your dream. You grew up in GM. How do we make that dream a reality for tomorrow's leaders and tomorrow's workforce?
Well, first of all, call me Mary, and really proud to be here today. But I would say there's multiple programs that we're doing, but one that I'm really proud of, and it's one that Mark Royce started, was the Student Corps. And working with high schools, giving them an opportunity to work for the company over the summer. And then the great part of it is we have retirees who have volunteered their time, and the students are divided into teams, and they each work with a retiree and different projects, whether it's beautification projects or doing some renovation of a neighborhood or a school. But they're also learning about life, learning about business. And I'm so proud of that program. Because we now have students who have gone through it and have gone to college and are able to take some of the jobs we're talking about. And then I'd highlight one other is our focus on STEM, on science, technology, engineering, math, I think is what STEM stands for. But it's really math and science. And focusing, because as a mother of a daughter, I saw that odd dynamic that happens in middle school where all of a sudden girls start to pull back and going, well, wait a minute, I don't want everyone to think I'm really good at math, or am I supposed to like science? And if you look at the way technology is impacting every single industry, if you don't have to, I think it's good if you know how to code, but you at least have to understand how it works and understand technology so it isn't something that you push away from. And so we do a lot of work there to make sure at that critical middle school age, young girls and young boys, for that matter, are not stepping off the STEM track because once you step off, it's pretty hard to step back on.
That says, I believe the auto industry will change more in the next 5 to 10 years than it has over the last 50. If we don't continue to encourage young boys and girls to get into the STEM fields, how are we going to keep up globally? I would imagine this is something that is on your mind continuously as you try to develop a workforce that can compete to be number one overall around the world.
Well, you're absolutely right. If we don't make sure we have the technical talent in this country, because companies already, there's a shortage. And so we need to make sure that we're providing the education and providing teachers with the skills they need to make sure that they are teaching the latest technology and getting students to be excited. So it is something that we spend a lot of time on in our corporate giving. One of our pillars is education. And that focus is to make sure we're creating more resources as people go through K through 12 and then on to college or into other pathways to get into these technical fields.
I wanted to ask you, you talked a little bit earlier about your family and the ability to balance, and I really appreciated your answer, but I wanted to know if you felt any added pressure being Mary Barra, being the CEO of a globally iconic brand. Do you feel any more pressure to show young ladies and women that you can have enormous success in corporate America and still be in the carpool line and get the snacks for the soccer game?
You know what? I love that question because, I'm really proud of the fact that even as I was in this role, I made it to almost every one of my children's sporting events because it was really important to me. And that meant that sometimes I was flying late at night or getting that last report written, early in the morning to be able to do that. But those are really important. And I would say one example is when my son was in high school and in his current affairs class, the question was, who is the CEO of General Motors? And I guess someone wrote Nick's mom. And I was like, I said, if somebody marks that wrong, you call me, because I am Nick's mom, and I'm proud of that. And when Rachel, with Rachel, her friends, and just, I guess, spending time with them so they know I'm just a regular mom. And I'm really proud of that. So I wouldn't say it's an added pressure. I would say that the position comes with tremendous responsibility, because I feel like I'm representing 155,000 people, and I want to make sure that they know how special the team is at General Motors. And then for my family, like I said, the mom job's pretty important to me.
I would imagine. Tell me a little bit more about how you're handling the conversation around race when it comes to your kids, when it comes to that balancing act between your corporate face, your family persona, and what you want them to understand about who you are, because it is difficult. You both had parents that are involved in public life, under that spotlight. People say things that aren't so flattering, and you have a family. It's personally very difficult, and I want to know a little bit more about how you deal with those things when it comes to the family, when it comes to making sure that people understand your true character. You said that the company is going to do what's right even when it's difficult, and just kind of speak to making sure that you can keep your personal values in line with your corporate values too, because I know that has to be difficult at times.
Well, and I would say from a senior leadership perspective, the team that I lead of about 15 people, we collectively own the values for the company, the behaviors that we ask everyone to live, and we tell everybody, hold us accountable. If you see us not demonstrating one of the behaviors that we think are key to General Motors and consistent with who we are and what we believe, call us out, because we all have to hold each other accountable. And I think that's very important. And from a very personal family life, it's having those transparent conversations. And often we learn because the four of us have very different experiences. And somebody can say, well, I think this. Well, you know what? Have you thought about this? Have you experienced that? My friend deals with this. And so I think whether it's having conversations with GM team members or having conversation with family and friends or the experiences my immediate family has, it's about learning, because you have to be aware of something and have discussion to then really understand and drive change that I think we need across this country and frankly across the globe.
Absolutely. Is there a great need for mindset change underneath you? Because in order to realize some of the goals that you've set forth, and we actually tip our hats to what you're trying to accomplish here when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. But will that require a mindset change for a lot of the folks under you in middle management to make sure that these goals are carried out? You may meet some resistance in there. And how are you going to make sure that we're continuing on the same path as the goals that you've set forth?
Well, I think all of us are learning, and I've been so proud of how many people, we had a senior leader, which is about the top 250 people at General Motors, and we have regular sessions, and we talk about, had one whole session, and this is global, dedicated to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and people sharing what they're learning, what they're doing. Sometimes it wasn't their proudest moment, but it was a moment of awakening for them. And I think that sharing is just facilitating more and more and more conversations. But I would also say then we do workplace of choice surveys where we look at engagement and inclusion. And so people get an understanding of how that organization is viewed, and we're holding ourselves accountable to improve the feedback that we get from employees of how do they feel around engagement and inclusion.
Yeah, you're certainly leading by example. I'm going to send it back to Dennis now and continue to monitor the questions as they come in through our social media feeds. And we'll check back in with you in just a few moments. Dennis.
Thanks, Mark. We'll be back to you. Mary, you mentioned a couple things. One, Mark expounded on the question about your kids and setting an example, and even in the workplace and into the public, being a working mom, uber successful, but still being able to balance the two, and it being a great example. it's got to be inspirational for you to go back into that plant that you managed, where there are people still working there, and for them to look at you in your position now and say, wow, there is a path for me to go in from this plant to the CEO position, or from this plant to the C-suite. A lot of times, African Americans leave corporate America because they don't see a clear line. They don't have mentorship. They don't have someone pulling them up, or they feel like the standards are higher for them for promotion as they are for some of their white counterparts. Talk about what's being done in GM from an HR perspective to increase the pipeline of minority applicants, and then once they get in the organization, make sure they stay.
Well, and what you said is just so important, because it's one thing to attract, but it's another to make sure this is where it's important, because if the culture's not there, if the person doesn't feel valued, supported, they're not going to stay because they have choices. And so we talk about it quite a bit as a senior leadership team. I just recently did individual reviews with each area of the company, looking at how are we doing from a hiring perspective, retaining, promoting. And then what are the goals and where should we be? And we've set aspirational goals for every single area across multiple dimensions. And we'll now do these reviews every 6 months to make sure it isn't just a meeting where then you close the binder and then open it up again 2 weeks before. No, this has got to be our focus. I would say another thing that we do is for this group of the most senior leaders in the company, which is about 250, I and my team approve those. And so we look and say, okay, where was the diverse slate?
Right.
And if it wasn't a diverse slate, tell me what you're going to do so 3 years from now there is a diverse slate. And so, that's how we're focusing on that. But I also think having senior African Americans in leadership roles, Gerald Johnson
does a great job.
He does a great job. But one of the lessons I've learned is you can't just look to your black executives to do the job. It's got to be everyone's. And so he's though really helped us all learn and given us a different perspective. And so he's been very vulnerable to open up and share some of his experience so we can all be better. Because often, if you don't sit in someone's shoes, you sometimes don't know what they've gone through.
What does diversity look like globally? I mean, in the United States, we think about what it means here, being an African American male. It has certain meaning to me, but you do run a global enterprise, but you want to have consistent policy across the board. And so if you look at where else you are across the world, and you're everywhere, what does diversity mean in those places, and how do you adjust or amend what you're trying to do in the United States in those outposts?
Well, I think, something that I thought was very powerful, if you look at the reaction after the George Floyd murder, it was global. And so when we had our first session that was dedicated to diversity and inclusion with our senior leaders from all across the country, we had different people from different regions speaking. From the Middle East, a lot of times the diversity challenges or where people feel that there's inequities is around religion. And so we had an open conversation that, of course, gender diversity. So there was a really good kind of aha moment for those of us who primarily sit in the U.S. to understand what it looks like in different countries around the world.
And then sticking with that for a second about inclusion, you said you want GM to be the most inclusive company in the world. What does that look like when you get there?
Well, I think it starts with the foundational of the culture is such that no matter if someone's been there 40 years or 4 days, that they see a culture where they're valued, they belong, they can be their true self. It looks, it is very diverse at all levels of the company, not just entry level, but at the most senior level, all the way to the board. And then it's looking at what are our employees telling us, and are we in the top quartile, the top decile? Because we are able, with the workplace of choice surveys that we do to compare ourselves to other companies, are we the best of the best as it relates to how people feel from an engagement perspective and how they feel from an inclusion perspective?
Interesting. So I'm going to switch topics for a second. One question, then I'll kick it back to Mark in the studio. Big push in the EV, significant investment. Love the fact that it's here in Detroit, and wasn't aware that was a plant that you were at, so it's even more significant to you. Studies show, though, that only about 50% of the population are bought into EVs right now. And so we know it's better for the environment, it's better overall for us as humans to get to that point. But how is that number going to affect the pace at which you want to move and you think we should move? And then what can we do collectively, either through educational campaigns where you're educating folk and giving them more information about the benefits of an EV vehicle? What do you see as your either responsibility towards that education, or else maybe you don't reach the pace or keep up with the trend that you want to set?
Well, I think that's critically important, because I think the pace of adoption that we need to have from a climate change perspective is important, for our generation, our kids, their kids, et cetera. So it's something that is critically important. But I think, and the way we're approaching electric vehicles at General Motors is to make the experience better than owning an internal combustion vehicle. So it's got to be the right segment. That, somebody, if they want to drive a crossover, they don't want a sedan. So it's got to be the right segment. It's got to have the right range, which customers tell us is around 300 miles on a charge. But then, and it also has to be affordable. And we need to look at total cost of ownership, because fuel costs are different than charging. So, but again, it's that monthly bill that you're paying. Either you're paying it in a car payment, an insurance payment, and at the gas pump, or you're paying it, the first two and then, lower. So you have to look at that overall. But we believe that we can create a ownership experience that's better. And one of the key things to do that is a charging infrastructure. So right now, customers tell us, I want to charge at home. It's the most convenient. And think about it. When you charge your phone, you don't worry about how long it takes to charge. You plug it in when you go to bed or when you're going to be away for a while, and it charges away. That mindset, people are right now, well, I need to have charging stations as much as there's gas stations. Actually, you don't. But not everyone has a garage.
Right.
Not everyone even has an assigned parking spot. So that's where we have to work with communities, and the federal government, I think, is taking a leadership role with the Biden administration to say we've got to have a robust charging infrastructure that's truly for everyone. And then, of course, when that day that you're traveling from point A to point B and it's more than 300 plus miles, having a robust fast charging network as well. And that's what we're working on with a collection of startup companies, existing companies, and communities and the federal government to make sure that as we have more and more electric vehicles available in the market, people know they have a better situation from a charging perspective.
Well, I will tell you, when I was last with our friend Deborah, I sent her an email immediately after. I said, sign me up for Lyric.
All right. It's beautiful. Yes.
I'm looking forward to it. Mark, I'm going to go back to you in the studio.
All right. Thanks, Dennis. I'd like to get signed up for one of those too. Mary, we wanted to give you an opportunity, though, to respond.
Exactly.
Is that right? Okay. But Mary, we wanted to give you an opportunity to be able to respond to the Black media controversy and the advertising spending and some of the plans that you put in place to make sure that there is inclusion when it comes to some of the Black media press buys that GM engages in, and to make sure that there is fairness and equity when it comes to that area of your business. We understand that you have some solid commitments in place. If you could just go ahead and talk to the philosophy behind it and how you monitor it to make sure that there is more fairness when it comes to the distribution in those ad buys.
Well, I think if you're on the journey to become the most inclusive company in the world, when you get praise or when you get criticism, you have to take it seriously, and you have to look objectively and say, how can I be better? And so as we looked at our diverse media spend and specifically Black media spend, we recognized that we could make some changes to be better. We looked and said, because General Motors is such a large company, we probably focused on scale at the expense of understanding companies that could add a tremendous amount of value. And so we changed processes. We also started an incubator, and we also listened. I would say I participated, I think it was 7 or 8 sessions with many different companies, and said, tell us how we can be better. What do you perceive as changes we could make or barriers? And we implemented, I think, virtually every suggestion that we made, and then set a goal for ourselves to, by 2025, to have 8% of our spend be with Black-owned media. And so we learned, we made changes, and I'm really proud of the team for how quickly they moved forward and said, you know what, this is how we can be better and be more inclusive, and you know what, it's going to be better for the business.
Yeah. How difficult was that period for you? There was an ad taken out in the free press. That has got to be very, very difficult to deal with, especially in a senior leadership situation for you. How did you work through that internally? I would imagine there were plenty of hearty discussions.
Well, we did have internal discussions, and I will tell you personally, it really hurt because, I feel like I've worked really hard my whole career to, if people ask me to explain my leadership style, I say it's inclusive. I like to collaborate. I like to hear different points of view. So it was hard, but again, when somebody's criticizing you, to me, I'm always going to look at how do I become better from going through this experience. And that's what we as a company focused on. And I'm really proud of the work of Deborah and her team, because I think we made improvements and we're stronger for it. And we'll move forward.
Yeah. We have a question from our viewers on our social media page. Susan Watts would like to ask if you've considered the importance of keeping and maintaining the green spaces we have in Detroit neighborhoods, and to give GM's perspective on the trends for green spaces in urban areas.
Well, I think, if you want to have successful urban areas that people live, work, spend discretionary dollars and their time, you need to have an inviting opportunity, and green spaces are an important part of that. I'm really proud of all the work we've done on the riverfront, because I remember I was one of the original 50 people when General Motors bought the Renaissance Center, that I was in the first 50 people to move into the RenCen. And when I look at the way it was now to the way we have, a beautiful area to walk, and people leverage it. Every now and then I happen to have the benefit with my office to look over it, and in the summer there's no day better when you see the fountains and you see children running through them, and just it's joyful. Or I've been here on the weekend, and the bus or the biking groups that go up and down the river. So I think it's vitally important that it's a place people want to be, and green spaces are a part of that.
Absolutely. We have another question from Alana Pitlawani. She says, have you considered implementing a Mark of Excellence award targeted toward strides in DE&I? This could help bolster even more support.
Well, we have a recognition system in the company already where it's a peer-to-peer where anyone can recognize anyone else, and it's based on our behaviors. And because last year we added the behavior Be Inclusive, people can recognize each other frequently on what they're doing to create an inclusive environment. And I see a lot of those. And I think that kind of recognition that's fast and frequent is probably even more powerful than whether something that's monthly or once a year. So I'm really proud of how it's taking hold.
All right. You mentioned the federal government, and when you were talking about your electric vehicles initiatives, and as I'm sure you're aware, the debate continues over infrastructure, and there doesn't seem to be much moving forward in that area, in that conversation, when it comes to our government leadership right now. How active will you be in trying to move that discussion forward? Because this is incredibly vital to what you do, to the products that you manufacture, and your ability to help us transition into a more environmentally friendly vehicle.
Well, I think this is one of the goals of the current administration, the Biden administration, and I think there's a place to find common ground. So I'm a people talk about, is your glass half full or half empty? Well, mine's always 3/4 full. So I believe this is so important that we're going to find a way to get the key elements. It may not be everything that's currently in the bills, between the two groups right now, but I believe we'll find some middle ground that's going to advance, because I think fundamentally people do agree that climate change is one of the most important issues facing our generation, and we have to take steps. And we have been and will continue to be very vocal, very supportive, and also providing the whys and helping people understand, what does it really mean, and how does it affect, an individual consumer when they're making a choice of, am I going to buy an internal combustion vehicle or electric vehicle? We'll continue to do that.
Right. What does that look like, Mary? Is that going to be an educational campaign? Will that be a marketing campaign? What is that going to look like to help the public understand the need for more environmentally friendly vehicles?
Well, I think it's all of the above, and it's a marketing campaign. From an advertising perspective, we already have everyone in, and we think it's showing people it is for everyone, and that it's going to be many different forms of vehicles or segments to reach people, because often people need a vehicle to live their life the way they choose to live it. So we're not going to change that. And that's where I think General Motors is uniquely positioned, because we're a full range manufacturer. We've already, over the last few years, invested in the Ultium platform, which allows us to do a wide variety of vehicles off this platform quickly. So I think we're just going to continue to do that, but it's educating our dealers so they can educate consumers. It's direct education, it's advertising, it's talking to governments at the local, state, and federal level and across the globe, and we'll continue to do that.
All right. And Mary, just before I let you go, MC Moore says it is great when your company CEO is someone you can admire because he or she has compassion for the issues of the day, whether on the local, national, or international stage. So some praise for you coming in on our Facebook page. Dennis, back to you.
Thanks, Mark. We talked a lot about, Mary, about EV, but you've made other very sizable investments in other businesses, Lyft for one. Do you see additional investments like that being strategically made on behalf of the organization?
Well, I think one of the most strategic investments that we made was in Cruise, and we bought Cruise and we're able to create an environment where the founder and co-founder said, "I want to be a part of this," and now that 40-person group is almost 2,000 people. And we just last week were the first to be awarded a license in San Francisco to be able to give commercial rides, and we have a development plan that I'm very pleased with how it's progressing. So autonomous vehicles, I think, are going to be a very important way that people move in the future. I mean, they follow all the traffic laws. They don't drive impaired or distracted. And when you look at today, and the numbers were just out, I think about over 37,000 people lost their lives in the U.S. alone. I believe this was last year's information, but it's the latest information. 90% of those fatalities are attributed to human error. So imagine if you have an autonomous vehicle that doesn't have those human errors.
Right.
I think we can move to safer transportation. And I also think autonomous vehicles change our cities to, getting back to green space, give us back more space, because you don't have to park right next to where you're going. You can be dropped off, and vehicle can be, charged or staged in an area that's close, but not next door to where you need to be. So I see tremendous opportunity with autonomous vehicles.
Exactly. It's funny. It reminds me of the Jetsons. As a kid, you
Exactly.
see these cartoons, and it seems so futuristic, but that's actually the now.
I agree. I used to watch the Jetsons, so yeah.
Have you been in one of these
yeah.
self-driving vehicles
Yes.
out in traffic?
Yes.
And what's the experience of it? Was it freak you out at the beginning?
Well, at the beginning, you're like, whoa, this is kind of strange. But I have to tell you, 2, 3, 4 minutes in, you're like, this is good, this works, this is, and then you're just intrigued with the technology and how sophisticated it is. But very quickly, when people talk to me about, autonomous vehicles are going to be so hard to get people to trust them, I'm like, we need to get them in them. Because once people experience it, I think they're going to be sold. And we've seen that with, right now, we have semi-autonomous driving, what we call Super Cruise.
Yep.
And, again, getting people to have that experience, it's one of, so I've been in this business a long time, and over 85% of people, once they've experienced Super Cruise, have said, I either won't buy another vehicle without it, or I strongly prefer it. That's pretty high praise for a technology. And so, again, I think it's experiential that's going to be key to getting AV adoption, excuse me.
And to me, the pace of how fast cars have become technologically advanced. I think it was about 2013 when the XTS and the ATS had the touchscreen, the Cube was introduced.
Yeah, right.
And at the outset, it was like, this is weird. But now, I mean, the cars are even so much more advanced, and they're driving themselves. And so who knows what the next 10 years, well, you probably know because you have all access to the research, but I'm excited about what the next 10 years development looks like?
Well, I think, when you think about how much the vehicle is becoming truly a software platform, and with software, what we enable people to do. But just imagine, today we buy a vehicle and that's the way the vehicle is going to be. Imagine a vehicle that just keeps getting better through your ownership experience. So I think customers are going to be delighted with where we're headed.
We're talking a lot about technology, and we've seen very publicly recently attacks by, I'll say, the lawyer in me will say, alleged foreign interveners hacking into systems. Public energy grids, a meat production facility.
Right.
How much focus have you been and are you as an enterprise putting on protecting your assets from being hacked?
I will tell you, shortly after, we have a cyber and risk management committee of our board, and then we have a management cyber board. So monthly, we're looking, and we have a team. I'm very proud of the team that we have across all areas with deep technical expertise. And so it is something we've invested a lot of time and made sure we have systems. And it really becomes about layers of defense, whether it's in your operations or in our vehicles. And so we've rolled out a new vehicle intelligent platform, started in 19, that really, because you think about it, the vehicle is going to be out for years, and as technology keeps advancing. So we've done a lot of work there, and continue to be very diligent on making sure we're ahead or providing protection for our customers and for our business and our employees.
So Mark mentioned earlier, he talked a little bit about federal legislation. If you could wave a magic wand and get any legislation passed that you wanted that would affect your business or the environment, et cetera, what would that be?
Well, I think infrastructure overall, this is something we need to invest in this country. We haven't, and when you look at our roads or our bridges or some of the different failures we've seen, I think we need an investment in infrastructure. But as we do that, we need to make sure we modernize it for not only what is available today but tomorrow, which means comprehending how AV, autonomous vehicles, and electric vehicles can improve all of our lives. So I'd say that's one pretty high on my list.
So, Mary, black folks are intensely loyal, sometimes to a fault. And we definitely support brands that we feel support us. So I'm looking over here at this clock, and it says 20 seconds. So in 20 seconds, tell us why we should buy GM vehicles.
Well, I think because we have created these vehicles around the customer. When I think about Cadillac and the heritage of Cadillac and the loyalty, critically important. But all of our vehicles are focused on improving the experience for the customer and making their life easier as they move from point A to point B.
Look, you are extraordinarily busy, and
As
on
are
behalf
you.
of, well, not as busy as you, but on behalf of Hiram and Mark and the Real Times Media team and the Michigan Chronicle, we appreciate you not only participating but agreeing to come here to our studio in Paradise Valley to do so. So thank you very much.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity. This has been really special, and for us to be able to share what's happening at General Motors from a diversity, equity, inclusion, and a little bit about our futures was a lot of fun. So
And be careful, because we're probably going to ask you to come back.
I'll look forward to it.
All right, thank you. Thanks to all our viewers. Mark, great working with you, brother. Everyone have a good afternoon.